Well, good afternoon. It's good to have you back. Why don't we start by just giving an update on where you are in terms of your work or what it is you're up to lately?
I finished my PhD uh,
Congratulations.
August, thank you. And I was accepted to UAB Merit Scholars. I racked the postdoc program.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, yes. So I am doing that. I have transitioned from my awesome dry lab to a fruit fly lab, which is also awesome, but it's just not as flexible
Hmm.
my lifestyle.
The flies don't really care what you're doing this weekend.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And not so much the flies, just how this particular PI runs her lab in general. And and this is good though, because it shows me what I definitely want and what I definitely don't want
Yep.
my career to look like. And so yeah. I'm ready
I,
to start it, that's for sure.
I actually had a similar postdoctoral experience where I would come home and I would say like, okay, I definitely don't want to do it that way. Or
Yep.
I
Yeah.
definitely see something like, all right, let's avoid that going forward. So
Yeah.
those can certainly be useful. Do you know where or what you might be teaching, or does that come later on?
Um, it kind of comes later on. So right now, I am in the middle of doing teacher observations at the different partner schools that we have. And so once I'm done with that, I will choose a teaching mentor, and then basically like start like really deep dive observation of the specific teaching mentor that I have, and then start teaching some classes.
And how far away are the partner schools? Are they basically Alabama, Mississippi, that part of the world?
They're all in Alabama.
Oh,
Yeah, within a 2-hour drive or less. Mhm.
wonderful. Yeah, I wish that is not something, at least I don't believe that was a thing that existed when I was a trainee, and it would have been
It did
perfect.
not, because
Yeah.
it almost didn't exist while I,
Okay, there you go.
So yeah,
It would have been
yes, it's
perfect for
very
me.
new.
You sort of had to
Yeah.
carve some things out, and I got lucky in certain respects. So I would have loved to have had something that I knew I could apply for that would tangibly like fit what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
So
because I mean, this was the only postdoc I applied to, because all of the other postdocs, I mean, I had no motivation to even apply because they were nothing that I wanted
yeah.
at all.
I
So
actually went on. It was, I guess, embarrassing in retrospect, but like I went on a couple postdoctoral interviews where I did a bad job because my motivations just did not align with
mhm.
theirs. And it took me a few bad interviews to realize like, why are you not talking about the research? Because that's what they care about. And
Right.
yeah, that was that was revelatory for me, I think, in terms of what I like and what I enjoy, and
Yeah.
sort of what I've God, 15 years later, find myself now doing. Um, so thank you for sharing that. And I don't spend enough time with Jeremy in my life, so I'm glad that he's here now. Jeremy, can you hear me?
Hey, sorry, I'm trying to plug in headphones and
No
they're
worries.
not. I'm in a conference room. Sorry, I was running late. So I'm trying to join with headphones, but they're not working.
It's
Sorry.
all good. It's just like I find myself coming running into you many, many times now. So I'm like, oh, here's someone I don't talk to almost every day, right?
Yeah, so give me a minute. Let me find what's going on my headphones. I can't
Not
hear
a
well
worry.
without headphones. So give me a
Not a
second.
worry. So while
Okay.
he's setting up, I can go ahead and sort of set the table on this paper. Um, I picked this paper because number one, it's relatively new, but also it's something that I have certainly given a lot of thought of in my own work, and that is the idea of achieving buy-in for my classes, especially with respect to the particular way I might choose to teach my classes. And so we here at Palm, of course, are all about active learning. And so how do I best sell active learning to my students? How do I get them to understand that active learning is a good thing and not something to be feared? How do I get them to realize I'm still doing my job, right? That sometimes the pushback on active learning by students is that they're doing all the work and all you're doing is sitting there. You're like the lifeguard. So I saw the title of this and was immediately drawn to it. And what you have here is actually a pretty interesting sort of confirmation of a framework. And so it was really interesting once I dug into this to see what this paper was all about. And it's got some pretty heavy hitting names, David Hanauer, Mark Graham there as individuals who know what they're talking about when it comes to assessment, figuring out how active learning effectiveness can be documented. And so this paper is drawn off of work done before that's largely based from a single educator in a single classroom of finding criteria to what goes into achieving this elusive student buy-in. And this is more of a verification paper than anything else. The paper itself, I mean, we can show you this, just the two figures, right? We got this guy here, and then we have the statistical confirmation here. And it won't surprise you to learn I'm not going to be labor the stats because it's a wee bit out of my wheelhouse, but I think the model here is absolutely worth talking through, and maybe a consideration of how one is able to develop these particular strategies in their own classrooms and what has worked and maybe what has not worked. And so the magic for ingredients that is used here to get the outcomes over here on the far right, the idea of persistence in science and the idea of an improved grade. And we've talked in other sessions about the positives and negatives of using grades and increases in grades as a way of measuring success, just because of some of the, I guess, issues in the way that grading distribution can be done. All of that said, we have the ingredient of trust, of a growth mindset, and I'd be very curious to know what you guys have to say about that, about buy-in, and you see here sort of a three-step process to considering buy-in, and then engagement. And so the scheme here would be that if I begin and instill an attitude of trust and a growth mindset in my students, I therefore go through a process where they buy in to what it is I'm trying to do and provide engagement that therefore leads to both persistence and improved grades. And so this paper is all about looking at a variety of assessment instruments to go in and understand what, first of all, the efficacy of that model, right? Is that model actually correct, or maybe correct's not the right term, but effective? An effective means of looking at how one can measure this sort of stuff. And then if it is so, can I start to figure out how to use it, right? How I can best employ it, maybe in my own individual class. So you see here with the results, in this table, we're looking at correlations to show that the framework pretty much does make sense in terms of correlation between these individual ideals and what is recovered in terms of identification, commitment, engagement, persistence, etc. And they talk about the different instruments they're able to use to assess these various ideals, the questions that are asked in terms of understanding if students are coming to these courses with an open mind in terms of both what to expect and that they can improve themselves, that there is a place to move forward, right? And then with all that in play, can you go and actually run what's called SEM analysis and I'm going to remind myself E is equation, and I'm trying to find the structural equation modeling. So this model, this technique here of using a multivariable analysis to corroborate the actual efficacy of this structure, like, is this sequence correct? And so what you're seeing here, again, I'm not going to belabel the stats that are not in my wheelhouse. These packets are here. This I will look at because I was curious, and the answer is buried in materials and methods. Basically taking the assessment tools, taking all the different responses that are present and separating them randomly into these, they call them packets, taking the information and looking at them small groups at a time, simply because there are too many variables to look at in one giant chunk. So they take all the different inputs for trust, for growth mindset, for persuasion, for identification, etc., and they split them up into random groups to allow them to run their analysis with more manageable pieces. And the punchline of all this is that this progression does indeed make statistical sense when they look at the larger volume, when they look at not just one classroom, like in the forerunner to this, but with multiple classrooms, multiple different types of students being put into this pathway. Most of them, admittedly, are at research-intensive institutions, so you could certainly quibble with, does a model like this work at a PUI, a community college, etc. But by and large, it seems to make sense, at least in terms of the stats and how that runs out. I think the main point of discussion for us today would be not so much the efficacy of the model, although if people have comments on that, I would love to hear them, but maybe how one attains these different values. That if I want to take this model and now use it as an effective means of teaching, how do I engender trust? How do I bring a growth mindset to my students? And how do I know that I'm doing it effectively? What means do I have to know that I've gained that? So I think that's what I'd like to devote the lion's share of our time to today. So maybe I would just ask, first off, if you guys had some just general comments on the model itself. Bree, it looks like you may have something to say.
I mean, I was truthfully just surprised. I'm a bit more, my question is more about like their results on all this and like how this whole trust thing in general. This whole trust thing. Like, I mean, I don't know. I guess I definitely thought that like a growth mindset would have been more correlated with everything.
Yeah, I want to go back and see how they measured trust.
Right, yes, yeah.
A
So
9-item measure that examined 3 components of trust: understanding, acceptance, and care.
yeah, and so like they give example questions, which is very good because I certainly would not have really understood it if they didn't. So like, yeah, does my instructor get me? What is that even? What, like, is that crazy that I just am like, why are they concerned about this?
I suppose that could relate to learning style, I guess, but what is gets me, yeah, and Jeremy says that, what does that actually mean? Yeah, that is an interesting thing. And whenever one, and again, I'm not going to pretend to be a student of psychology here, but trying to sort of attain this level of, I guess, picking the brains of your students.
Well, because it's like, to me, it's like we're getting into the realm of like with parents and their children and like becoming friends. Like, I'm their professor, I'm their instructor, I'm not their friend. You know, we're not friends, you know, and so it's like, it's very interesting. I know that we're trying to tap into the students' minds, right, to better reach to their level, but doesn't there come a time to where, like, I don't want to say that they're expecting too much, but it's like maybe their perception of what they should be expecting is not correct for you know, the environment that they're in. Like, this is a higher education environment. You're adult, I'm your instructor, I'm an adult. do I get you in what way? In the sense of you understanding my class and doing what you're supposed to do, or get you as in like we're buddies and like, do I think you're cool or something? Like, what does that matter? I don't know.
Yeah, and well, I look too down here. My instructor truly cares about my educational welfare, which may be a more directed question in terms of like, does my we're not buddies, fine, but like, do I have some level of compassion? Do I do I not that I don't have a stake in the outcome, but am I doing what I can to help you succeed? I think that might be another interpretation of that, which would be different from getting me, quote unquote, admittedly.
Yes. And I think that's even different from my instructor accepts me for who I am.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a whole other issue. Which is a whole other issue if the question you're asking there is, does my instructor have a problem with me because of who I am, right? Because that can be a whole different direction.
Yeah, now that's a completely different thing. And I wonder if they asked that, because I feel like, you know how they especially they beef up the fact that this whole flow and everything kind of seems to work for many demographics.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the real question, especially in this specific section of trust, is does my professor, are they judging me, or does my professor have perceived notions of me and my work and my diligence and all of that stuff because of who I am? Yeah, that's a different type of question.
Yeah, and one that would probably be more problematic, I would think.
I don't know about problematic, but I definitely think that it would service us and, you know, people who did this study to really be more inclusive, because that's something that, you know, us in this type of stuff we talk about a lot. And so,
absolutely. Absolutely. And you are correct that they do make a big deal about gender not being a factor, or what were the other demographics they mentioned?
Race not being a factor.
Yes, racial ethnic groups, male and female students. Yeah. And it's a typical distribution in 2021, about 60% female in the class, which is again, that's about what you expect.
Right, yeah.
So you bring up some really interesting points there, right? The idea of, okay, if it's important to secure trust, what form does that take? When Jeremy comes back, I want him to explain this it's instructor immediacy, and what he means by that exactly. But what our definition of trust is with respect to what do I need to get us through our professional relationship in terms of trust, as opposed to maybe a more intimate definition.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of the growth mindset portion of this? Because I have to admit, I don't, besides trying to be compassionate, and I guess in the way I present things, I haven't given personally a lot of thought to how I encourage a growth mindset in my students. And in fact, I had to remind myself even how this is defined. Just the idea of your students believing that they're going to get something out of the class, as opposed to they're either going to get it or not get it. And so this was a more abstract concept for me in terms of how to go about attaining it. And I don't know, maybe you have some strategies, or maybe there's something you have tried here.
I mean, when it comes to like encouraging students to participate in growth mindset, or even buy into growth mindset, I feel like that's as simple as, you know, you even like when you're teaching a lesson and stuff, and you telling them the purpose of it, you know, and what they should be, you know, the objectives of the lesson and what they should be getting out of it. So, you know, they see what they didn't know from the beginning of the lesson and now what they do know now. I feel like that's doing it in not so much a direct way, but more of an indirect way through actions. You know? But yeah, I don't believe I've actually directly stated like or talked about with them.
Yeah. And I think I agree with that. Like sort of try to do by example, but not like, hey kids, growth mindset, like actually just to
Yeah.
describe it in detail. Hey,
Yes.
Jeremy, now that you're back, can you define instructor immediacy for us?
Ooh,
Yeah.
throw me in the deep end here, Mike.
Well, you wrote it there, so tell me what you mean.
So first, I apologize. It's one of those days where a student was supposed to come in and do a makeup at 10. He told me power outage and overslept. And so my office, I was running late because he came late and I've been trying to track him down. So one of those days I was like, I'll do double duty, grab my headphones. And of course that didn't work out well. So I apologize. I've been scattered.
No worries, no worries.
So I'm here now. You have my 100% attention now.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so Bree, you were bringing up some interesting points earlier, and I was following up on that because you're saying you're going back to the idea of the conceptions of trust,
Yeah.
of what actually is trust when you say something like my instructor gets me. And my thinking out loud thought was, how does this relate to instructor immediacy, the perception of instructor closeness, meaning
Okay.
right, like if you feel like that's what, going back to what you're saying, Bree, in terms of if you feel like your instructor is a friend with you, could that increase instructor immediacy and trust, even though instructors might deliberately establish that boundary and say, we're not a friend, but you can establish instructor immediacy in other ways. Like, I guess I'm just trying to think out loud about how do we break down trust?
Yeah.
How, like, going back to what you're saying there, right?
I guess, when I think about especially like when I was in undergrad, and the very few, literally just two professors that I guess I had those warm, fuzzy feelings about. And if I think about, how they indicated that to me or why I got those feelings from them, and it was truly just because they seemed to take time with me, always be there when I needed to have a question, kind of spend that extra time. They seemed to, when they were talking to me, they seemed to be very real, no political correctness going on, but just straightforward, give me the facts, these are the things you need to know to be prepared and successful. And so I guess maybe thinking of it that way, I can more understand what they're trying to say. But
and I guess I was defining immediacy more of as literally like doing things rapidly. So I'm glad you
I see.
you helped me
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we were also sort of, when you came back to us here, we were formulating our ideas of group mindset. And so neither one of us had been fairly explicit about the way that we pursued that with our students. And I'm wondering, Jeremy, if you have some other insights about ways that maybe you don't, maybe you do, approach that in your own teaching.
Yeah, I think that's something I definitely try and be explicit about. And, I think all of us have probably heard students say things like, oh, I'm bad at biology, I'm bad at science, right? And with that fixed mindset. And, something
certainly when I teach genetics, people go in thinking like, oh yeah, this isn't me. Yeah.
And so something I do on day one is I kind of, I do an opening activity and then I go through sort of a learning objective sort of classes and highlight how they're all active. And I go through resources before I go through resources, I say, you will be challenged. It's okay if you have a breakout session or group activity where you have no idea where to start. That's okay, right? I tell them, I want this to be a safe space where it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not be sure, but the learning is in the struggle. And I emphasize each and every one of you will and is able to learn and master this material. Here's the resources to help you learn and master that. And then we use that to talk about resources. So that's what I end up doing on day one to try and instill that growth mindset of, even if someone comes in thinking, oh, I'm bad at science, I'm trying to help dispel that by saying each and every one of you can and will master the skills necessary for this course. Here's the resources for how to support that. Kind of implicit, that means you can improve in there.
I guess it was, I guess I was just like under the impression that, well, you made it to a college classroom you must think that, you must somewhere in your mind think that you can learn more than what you know.
That's very interesting, right? And then you get into some philosophical discussions about what is the point of college. Maybe
Right.
we may agree on it, but I think I certainly we just went through our registration period, and I have a group of freshman advisees this year, and I'm going through and figuring out what they might want to major in going forward, and a lot of them are interested in economics and business, and more power to them. But the ones I worry about are the ones, and I get this all the time, that they don't show any particular interest in economic and business. So I'm like, well, why am I majoring in that? Well, it's just what you do. Like, it's just sort of the default. I'm not especially interested in this, but this seems to be where you go if you want to make money. And those people never seem especially happy with what they're doing.
I mean, well, that's the thing though. And I literally was having this conversation with somebody like a few days ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is. Yeah. What is college for? Because what the president and the big private investors and stuff like that, they have one idea of what college is. The faculty have another idea. And then depending on the student, they have a different idea. Because some people have this fantasy that college is a place where, you get to explore yourself and explore knowledge and all this stuff. It's like, well, I don't have time for that because I need a job with money today, actually yesterday. So,
I can think honestly for those, I can tell you that, I mean, I went to college, I went to grad school, and I didn't have any gaps. And so I think sometimes I need to be careful that I don't do that, right? Because I
didn't have any gaps either, but it was because I need a job and I need money now.
Yeah.
So
I guess sometimes being careful that there are some very practical considerations that the vast majority of people have, and I certainly needed a job too, but reminding yourself why people are there and what they're trying to get out of it. And that absolutely could affect, if I'm just in your class to check off this box and get through it, you certainly could have people coming in saying like, okay, I know I'm not good at this, I know I'm not going to do well at this, but I'm just going to suck it up and get through it. That's going to be actively playing defense, right, against your ability to generate that mindset that you're hoping to generate in your students. So I really appreciate, Jeremy, your sort of thoughts on maybe how to more deliberately tackle that, or really establish that with your students.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up both the major and sort of the necessity for jobs that both of you brought up, because I've seen, so I helped run a 1-unit seminar for our bio majors first year, and we bring in different external speakers to talk about their careers and where they went with a bio or bio adjacent degree. And we've had some speakers just say, look, I went in this field because it paid well. I'm not particularly passionate about it, but it's easy. This is a field I thought was easy that I could land into, and it pays pretty well. And here I am, 3 or 4 years after college, making this much. So it was a really interesting.
And there's the classic work to live or live to work story, right? That if you're not, some people don't get or don't really buy into the whole my career is my vocation and my calling and blah blah blah. And so if the idea is, look, just where am I going to do the best financially, and then my life is separate from that, then that mindset is going to make much more sense. So it really comes down to how you approach this.
That actually brings up a good question. I wonder if we need another Palm grant to work on this, but
I feel like
do we know if there's any studies that look at how students recently have defined or perceived the goal of a STEM degree in college? Like, how do students now in 2021 view the goal of a biology degree or some STEM degree?
I would be interested in that. I would imagine, just guessing off the top of my head, the answer would be because I need a ticket to get into medical school.
Thank you. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
But
Because we all know that biology teachers don't make any money. That's known now. So yeah.
but once you get past that top line, I think there could be some really rich data underneath there, right? That's how people enter the field. But then we also know, for a variety of reasons, that relatively few of them come out the other side of that pipeline. And so if that's the case, how do their attitudes change over time? And if you're talking about sort of literature, there's certainly been stuff done on the STEM pipeline, right? Who's coming out of it?
Right.
Are there certain groups that have advantages over other groups, et cetera, et cetera? So that certainly has been well studied. But the basic idea you're putting forward, that I think that's more abstract.
Right. Right.
So now we come to the buy-in portion of the program, and this is 3 steps. The idea of persuasion, identification, and commitment. Now, this one I have thought about more. If I'm going to do some kind of long-term group activity in my class, if I'm an organic chemist and I'm going to do the Pogel technique, which is very often panned by current students, but then is very effective for them learning the technique, right? How do I get students to not, well, they're not going to rebel against it probably in my class, but how do I get them to believe that I am working in their best interest? So the idea of persuasion and the idea of commitment. And so for me, the transparency at the beginning of the class is super important. The idea that I explain up front, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. If we're doing something brand new, I'm very open about telling the students, like, look, we are trying this new procedure for doing things. There may be some parts of it that look unpolished, but that is because, we are refining our model as we go. Like, I'm okay with the students understanding that I don't necessarily have all the answers in this particular case of how to do something effectively. So the transparency for me is important in this case on the persuasion front. Where do you guys fall on that? What approaches do you take?
Yeah, I would agree. Just transparency, with everything that I do. Again, just kind of reminding them of the purpose, our mission, why it's effective for them for now and in the future. They seem to, the buy-in is not immediate, but even with my non-STEM majors, they seem to at least get on the bandwagon by the end of the semester. So
That hopefully in the course of the stuff they've done, they've started to sense that you're not just trying to get out of doing your job, which is one of those ones we hear a lot with active learning. Like, no, I'm not taking a vacation here. This is actually harder work than a regular class.
yeah, I don't really have that, but just the fact of them buying into really the growth mindset, truthfully, of that this is a class and she's not just some biology obsessed person thinking that everybody should be a biologist, but that when she said that, this biology stuff really is relevant to other parts of my life, like outside
Mhm.
of school. Oh, okay. This makes sense. Okay, she wasn't, it wasn't a gimmick. you know?
My first year teaching, so I'm in year 13 at this point, God help me. And I remember in year 1, I was very like, oh, let's have a thing and let's talk about how to go to grad school and things like that. And it took me a while to realize, no, there is high value to not trying to photocopy yourself.
Mhm.
That understanding that, as you say, we're not just biology obsessed, trying to bring people into the field, that instead we want people to like more holistically think about the relevance of some of these things to people's lives. So I appreciate what you're saying there in terms of getting people to buy in, but then like that even goes to the next step, the actual engagement part of the process. You allude to sort of the cliched way of saying it would be the real world applications, but I mean for real though, that's to get people intrigued, to keep people intrigued, like how is this relevant to me and how can I best show that.
Yeah.
Jeremy, how about you?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything the two of you are saying there. While you were sharing that anecdote, Bree, I was thinking about in terms of persuasion, there was just yesterday, I was teaching my capstone class and it's around paper reading. And we've been stuck on this figure. So we spend 3 or 4 weeks on one paper. We're following a create method, gradual reveal.
That's hardcore.
And yeah, so we dive really into detail.
Yeah.
And so we've spent 2 class days on one figure and we're not done with it yet. We've gone through panels A, B, C, and D.
What is this like from Science or Nature? And there's like panel H, panel I.
Science advances. Yeah,
Okay,
it's on. I picked SARS-CoV-2, so it's a
that's
paper
smart. That's smart.
from February this year. So the relevance is there, although I think they're a little bit tired of that. But I think I could sense a little bit of frustration because it was like, we've been spending so long on a really dense figure. And I get it, that's really frustrating, right? When you don't have that much experience getting to that detail. And so I end up showing them my figure that I printed out. It has a million annotations scrawled all over it. And I was trying to, I guess, persuade them that, look, we're doing this together, that I'm having to stare at a figure and I have a little bit more experience than they do, but it's not like I have a magical ability to make things make sense. I'm reading the exact same words on the page that was published, just a couple months ago. So that was my goal. I don't know how well it worked. I'll see if I'll see if I have convinced them or picked up their spirits in the next class. But when you mentioned persuasion, that's what I was thinking of.
What you're doing there to me is showing your own humanity, right? That you're not an automaton that just understands all this biological stuff, but that when you are reading primary literature like that, you are reading something that is written for such a small audience that by definition, you're going to have to go look a bunch of stuff up. And that doesn't make you stupid, right? That makes you just a normal scientist trying to figure out what this exact wording is about, this exact paper is about. So I like that it's sort of showing that you don't need to beat yourself up for not knowing, not understanding real-time PCR the first time you see it. Just as an example, like all those code or ratios and things like that, you'll figure it out eventually. You have to. The number of times it took me to finally understand how CRISPR worked, for instance, I had an undergraduate actually go off. He got a really cool summer research gig, came back. I did a presentation, explained it all. I'm like, yeah, I still don't have. I still have any idea what you're talking about. And so, I remember my own personal struggle trying to get through something like that, and that wasn't even all that long ago.
And I think for the students, there's some parts of the papers we've found that just aren't, just parts of any paper that might not be well written or might be confusing, and the students come to me thinking they're the quote unquote dumb ones because they're like, we don't understand this, and I tell them, hey, I don't understand it either, right? Could just be a part that's not well written. I don't understand what the authors are trying to say here.
Which is another issue entirely, right? Of showing students the value of communication, dissemination, and how you go about doing that. That we can do a whole other discussion on that topic alone.
The last paper we're doing, there's a duplicated figure that I emailed the editors about. It's in a pretty reputable journal, but the editor hasn't gotten back to me. But it's literally a figure duplicated twice in that paper. So it's been a good discussion to our students about science communication and how publishing works.
What journal is that?
It was molecular ecology.
Okay, well, that's just that's an amazing mistake to get all the way through the process.
Yeah.
And I love that though, talking about papers to my students that have been published, especially in high impact journals, and they do have all these mistakes, and especially communicating mistakes, whether that's how they interpreted their results, and have no actual tangible evidence for those interpretations, or if it's actual, grammar edits and things like that. And I think it shows them that we, even when you are a high level PI working at an R1 school, hey, you're human, you make mistakes. You were just all trying to try our best. And that's what I want out of you in this class, is just you trying your best. So.
Which then brings us to engagement. And this is, now that you've got your whole model set, now that you're working with the students, what is it you're doing to be persistent about it? We have read stuff before about what does it mean to have truly active learning in your classes that we can have, and I'm guilty of this too, that I'll say like, oh, I'm teaching active learning, but really what I'm doing is like Socratic lecturing, and it's definitely not the same thing. And so are you just doing like a one-off group thing and then like you never do anything again, or is there something you are doing?
Isn't engagement more of like the students' engagement, not so much the instructor's engagement?
I think that's fair, yeah. I'm going back and getting their definition. Student self-reported engagement in self-regulated learning behaviors. So how do I encourage those behaviors in my students? When I'm reading this class at Charlie the material, yeah, fair enough. So I'm going off on my own tangent about keeping the students engaged, which is related, of course, but
Yeah.
how do I then confer those behaviors to my students? So what am I doing that is showing them the way, I think, to be engaged?
Mhm.
And so, Brie, let me ask you then, how, do you have particular approaches to that, or have you given some thought into how to best do that?
Well, in looking at how like the examples of what they were asking them, as far as like, oh, were they engaged and stuff like that, I wasn't really thinking about those types of things. So like some of their examples were, when I'm reading for a class, do I, the student, try to relate material to what I already know? Or before I study new course material thoroughly, I often skim it to see how it is organized. I feel like I don't really encourage them in that sort of way, but more of like, yeah, I don't know if well, okay, I do. I verbally encourage them to engage outside of class, but obviously, since I'm not with them while they're reading or doing things outside of class, I'm not really, there's no assessment there to see how that's working.
Mm-hmm.
But when they're in class, I'm all about engagement. And what does that mean? That means Bree has no problem sitting in a classroom of silence till someone wants to speak. Bree has no problem saying that we're going to sit here until someone says something, or calling on someone, or, well, I guess, I'm just teaching myself today. That's interesting, you guys. Yeah, I don't like silent classrooms.
I just had one of those literally this afternoon where I'm like, I could sit here as long as you.
Yeah, I already know this material. Let's be real. Come on, you guys. That's the type of engagement that I am very forceful about. But I guess I'll try to work in this other type of engagement that they're more so talking about. But again, I just don't know how we evaluate that, besides just like kind of blatantly asking them, are you doing these things?
Absolutely. So Jeremy, where do you fall on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think interesting points both of you are making, whether it's student engagement, instructor engagement. Yeah, I mean, I've been staring at the questions they've been asking, the instrument questions, and some of them are interesting. Like I often find myself questioning things I hear or read in this course to decide if I find them convincing. And I mean, in the back of my head, I was thinking about math, science, kind of STEM education from a young age. Like, when do students start questioning things they learn in a class? Like in elementary school, you learn that 1 + 1 = 2. Is the teacher really asking you to question that, or to question that fact? Like, I'm kind of curious when we start, like, in a normal trajectory, is it explicit that we start telling students to start questioning things and asking for evidence, or does that develop naturally?
I don't know, because as you're describing how you do the literature, primary literature, I think one of the big things that I know I had trouble with when I was a student myself, and therefore try to make a big deal of now with my own students, is the idea of it's okay to question what's in a paper.
Yeah,
Bree, you mentioned you like to see the papers with mistakes in them, and so showing that in terms of, okay, it's
Mm,
yeah, it is okay to question what you're seeing in here. Yeah, they are experts, but like they are not gods.
I
oh,
feel like
absolutely.
that has gotten better. Like, during the time of when I was an undergrad, that was not really imposed. Like, it was more, yeah, read this, they are the expert, and that's where that ends and lies. But now I feel like we are trying to teach the younger generations to question, and question early, and question often. So I feel like, asking this new set of students these types of questions, they might be more receptive to that because they are actually doing that and being told to do that. So,
Yeah, I agree absolutely with both of you. Yeah, that we're hopefully training the younger generation to question things, and absolutely for reading papers, right? Do the conclusions they draw actually supported by the data? But I guess my point was just thinking about how common is it in an intro setting for a student to actually question, or for an instructor to encourage them questioning. And I think they should, but how, like, if you're learning about intro bio, this is how mitosis works. How many instructors actually say to the students, how do we know this? Think about what's the evidence for this, right? How often does that happen in our non-paper reading based courses? How often are students actually thinking through that?
Besides paper courses, or when you're tangibly thinking or about to perform an experiment, at least for STEM, I don't really know if that language is used.
Right. So that's why I've been staring at that question that they're asking the students. Because
Yeah.
I was like, I wonder how students would respond to that in different courses. And I guess that's what they did here, but.
So I think that is a good, just talking through this point by point, an interesting sort of way to consider how we have individually gone through these different components, what's worked, maybe what's been less effective, or maybe a better way to say it, what we haven't tried yet, to try to attain this model. This paper suggests that this model is an effective one, and you can certainly question how it got there. But then it is just a good opportunity to talk about these different strategies. So I appreciate your guys' thoughts on this, and actually for only having 3 people here, this is a pretty dynamic conversation. So thank you guys very much today.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks for leading it. Sorry for being in and out.
Not a word. What is that behind you, by the way? Is that
One
a
of those
cell?
days. It's not from me. This is from a previous. I'm in
Oh, okay.
from a previous class. The courses I was working with a student on advising for courses for next
Oh
semester.
yeah, I recognize those codes. Yeah, that's for sure.
So those are mine. I take no
Oh, that's
credit for that.
it looks like metabolism now that I'm seeing some of the other codes back there.
Oh yeah, Krebs cycle, glucose,
ATP, yeah,
glycolysis.
good
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah, that
yeah.
doesn't give me trauma at all.
Where is is this normal for?
We have 3 sessions a month.
That's
There's
right. Okay.
always one of the 3 that is like this. So it's just
Okay.
people come when they can come, especially this time of year when things get really busy.
Right. So thanks for letting me be one of those people.
Of course. Well, I
Coming in
appreciate you
and
guys
jumping
being
in.
here.
So,
All right, I'll see you guys next time.
all right. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Bree. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. Bye.